Hey friends, it's me, Pastor Doug, with another word of encouragement for the day for today, Friday, June 4th. And today's word comes out of the book of Romans chapter 6, verse 18, and it continues our exploration of this idea that if Jesus is my king, well then anger and jealousy and pride and greed and insecurity and shame and all of those things are not my king. Why? Because Jesus is my king. Well, in Romans chapter 6, the Apostle Paul is developing this whole beautiful argument, and it sort of culminates in this passage in verse 18 where he says this. He says, "You have been set free from sin and have become slaves to righteousness." And this is so powerful because what Paul is doing is he's basically borrowing a common image of the day. Now, when we hear slavery, we get really nervous. We're really uncomfortable with that. Paul is not supporting slavery. He's not pro-slavery. He's just taking something that would have been common in his cultural context, and he's using it as a metaphor to explain a spiritual truth. And he's basically saying, listen, you and I were all slaves. We had to do what our slave master told us to do, and our slave master was sin. And we couldn't help but get angry and lash out. And we couldn't help, before Christ, we couldn't help but to get jealous and to become petty and mean-spirited. We couldn't help but be prideful and greedy. Before Christ, before we were regenerated, we were slaves to those things. We had to obey. But he says, now you've been set free from sin and have become slaves instead to righteousness. So friends, we have gone to what we have to do to what we get to do. When my kids were little, I used to use that phrase all the time with them when they would say, oh, we have to, whatever the thing was, eat our vegetables, go to the doctor, brush our teeth, do our homework, all those things that my kids didn't want to do, but I knew was good for them to do. They would say, oh, do we have to brush our teeth? And I would say, no, you get to brush your teeth. They would say, oh, do we have to read or do our homework? And I'd say, no, you get to do your homework, right? And it was a subtle, they kind of rolled their eyes at it, but it was a subtle reframing. It was no longer you have to do this. It was, no, this is a good thing and you get to do this. Friends, we have been set free from sin, what we used to have to do, and we've become slaves to righteousness. Now it's about what we get to do. We get to follow Jesus. We get to live righteous lives. We get to be filled with God's Spirit and to stay in step with His Spirit. We get to produce spiritual fruit. We get to be conformed no longer to the patterns of this world, but instead to be transformed by the renewing of our mind. Those are the things we get to do because of what Paul wrote here. You've been set free from sin, and you have become instead slaves to righteousness. We get to live righteous lives because of the Holy Spirit's empowerment and because of the transformation that Christ has done in us. We are now new creations according to 2 Corinthians 5:17. Beautiful truth. So friends, here's how I wanted to end this series on Not My King, is just reminding you and reminding myself that, you know what, I don't have to obey that stuff anymore. I don't have to listen to anger or greed or pride or any of those things. I don't have to listen anymore because I've been set free in order to serve my real King. Friends, have a great weekend. I sure hope you'll join us this weekend for our in-person services or our live stream services. We'll see you then, and then we'll pick these videos back up on Monday. Have a great weekend. We'll see you then.